We had a flood in our house, one of those things that is never expected and never looked forward to. And today we want to tell you a little bit about that flood and how do you react to these unexpected things in life and in ministry, and how do you keep going even when sometimes tragic things happen and things that are unexpected.
So all day during the day, we didn't have any electricity on. It was on September 4th. And that happened to be the day of our first granddaughter's birthday. And so we were preparing to celebrate her birthday in the evening. And so we had to deal with the absence of electricity all day, and our kids had to do schoolwork, draining all the power banks that we had, using their mobile internet to be able to do that.
By the way, that's another thing that it seems like in the last, 2 months or so, that we've had a lot of electricity outages. I don't know what that's connected to. We used to have a lot in 2014 and 15 when the war started, but that hasn't been a thing recently until just the last couple of months.
Yes, and so as we were kind of trudging through our day, finally we got electricity probably around 4 p.m.
Mm-hmm.
And then we were rejoicing that it
Christina's mom was in the kitchen. I was working at the desk in my room, and she called me, Caleb, there's water on the floor. It looks like something's leaking underneath the sink. And so I go running in there. We have these filters under there, and there was a little bit of water. Couldn't quite tell where it was coming from, but I noticed there was a little bit of water on one of the filters. It's probably the filters. Some little pipe is broken off, or something is leaking. So I start going through there trying to unhook all the filters, and I actually unhooked them all. There's water filters that we have, these 3 big things. Took them out of the kitchen, took them to the bathroom, and then, were you there when that was happening?
Yeah.
You were there? And then all of a sudden I hear, wait, that's not it. And I go back into the kitchen, and there is water running down behind the cabinets.
On the wall.
And, well, actually right before that, our neighbor came up, remember?
Oh yeah, that's right. She came up and she said, you guys are flooding us. And our hearts sank because we already flooded them one time and we had to pay to remodel their room because.
And it didn't seem to me, it seemed like, wait a minute, this wasn't that much water. How could we be flooding our neighbors with just like a couple little splashes of water underneath the kitchen sink? And then after that, I think Noelle noticed the water coming down behind the cabinets. And then we realized it wasn't us, it was our neighbors above us.
But to make matters worse, the neighbors above us were gone. And we pounded on the door and we tried to get somebody to come to the door and we tried to call them. The neighbor was at work and everybody else was gone because it was Friday. They all went to their house that is outside of the city. And we were stuck with the water just pouring down the wall and collecting in our ceiling, and our ceiling.
So while Christina was trying to go and find the neighbor, try to get into our house, try to shut the water off, do something, and we're trying to mop up all this water that's coming into our kitchen, and we have this stretched ceiling. It's like a rubber membrane type of a ceiling. I don't know what they call it in English, but
do they have it even?
They probably do. It's like kind of this stretched rubber ceiling. And one of the positive things is that if you do get water dripping through it, it'll just collect in there and then you can drain it. But I looked at the ceiling, and our ceiling was concave like this. And you could just see that there was probably at that point already maybe 100 gallons or more of water that had collected, and the ceiling was just starting to stretch down. In fact, so much that I couldn't open the upper cabinets, the door. So I know that you can poke a small hole in the ceilings, let the water drain out, and then it'll all shrink back up to how it was. Mm-hmm. And so I thought, okay, I'll poke a hole right in the middle of where it's stretching down, drain the water out, and I did that, but the water was coming in too fast to be able to drain the water out, and so I had to poke a bigger and bigger hole until we had a hole about this size. And because that's how fast the water was coming in.
Yeah, perhaps you can insert a little video of our
Yeah, I will.
scrambling. And here we are trying to prepare ourselves to celebrate our granddaughter's birthday, and we're thrown into this frenzy of trying to save our kitchen and bring in all the buckets and whatever could possibly hold water, and all hands on deck, trying to get the plumber to shut the water to the whole building, all of our apartments above us. And at that moment, you can really lose hope and lose track of.
So we had all the
your
kids running
focus.
around with buckets. We were trying to mop up off the floor. Basically, we're trying to save our neighbors below us from getting too much water damage. And I think we actually did manage to save them from getting too much.
Yeah.
But the water was just started coming down the walls, coming through the lights. And so one of the kids, they could see where the water was coming down the wall and started feeling the water. And they said, "Why is the water feel like it's stinging me?" And I looked and I realized the water was running down. We have concrete walls here, so they put grooves in the walls where the electrical, where the wires go, and the water was just running straight down where those wires were, down to the socket down below, 220 volts, and so that electricity was coming through the wall. So we ended up had to shut we just got
The
our
breakers,
electricity
yeah.
on, but had to shut the electricity off, and that lasted, I guess, about an hour probably, didn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Of active mopping, running about. We used all of our towels that we had, all of the buckets, all the hampers, clothes hampers that we have, big plastic hampers, and boy, I don't think I've ever been
Yeah.
that
I mean, that was like an hour where the water was just flowing. Yeah. And then thankfully the plumber for our building, he came and he shut off the water down in the basement, and then it slowly stopped, but we still had a wet apartment and ruined ceiling, ruined wall, and actually in this room where we're sitting right now, in fact, right there on the wall I'm looking at, it kind of ruined the wallpaper, ruined around the outside of the windows here and a couple other places, the wallpaper, as well as in the hallway too. Yeah. So that was our day. That was September 4th, wasn't it?
Yes. That's all right though, because our neighbor came down and she was really concerned, and she offered to pay for the remodel, for the fixing of those problems, which was very nice. We don't know yet if she is going to be able to pay for
we
our
feel bad.
problems and the neighbor down below,
Yeah.
but it is gracious of her to offer that.
So we actually haven't even done anything to prepare these things yet, because, kids are doing school, we're doing ministry, things are moving forward, and we just turned our AC on to dry the apartment out. We wanted to make sure it dried for a few days. Some of the lights quit working in the kitchen, I think, but other than that, basically everything works. And
It's very minor damage.
there's some damage in the wall that needs to be repainted, in the hallway, in the kitchen, in the living room here, and the ceiling needs to be replaced in the kitchen. Yeah. So actually, thankfully, we came out of it with very little damage. So everything except the one set of lights in the kitchen, I think, is still functional.
Just cosmetic things that need to be fixed up. Yeah.
But that kind of got me thinking about ministry and life, and how often that we run into these sort of hiccups, where we have this idea of how I'm thinking more in terms of a ministry, how our ministry is going to continue forward. We have ideas and plans and things, and all of a sudden it's like there's these things that are just, they stop us in the middle of the road, and it's like, stop, you have to take care of this, and they demand our attention. And how do we, number one, prepare for those things, I think, is very important. How do we react to those things is also very important. And then finally, I think, how do we use those things for God's glory and as a part of our life and ministry, and not just see those things as only a barrier to what we really want to do. And so, in my experience over the last 13 years here in Ukraine, there just periodically those things come up, right?
So how do you do your ministry now that, actually yesterday, Ukraine hit a new high of new daily cases of COVID, 4,600.
Oh, really? I didn't
Yes, 4,600. So So how does your ministry look like? How is it going?
So I think
reflect?
that when we had more tight quarantine, if you're not aware, Ukraine right now doesn't have very tight quarantine, even though the cases are going up and up. But when we had very tight quarantine, obviously we adjusted in the sense of doing services online, a lot of things online. And I think people kind of got a little burned out with that, so we tried to adjust to those things as much as possible. And I think that there was some point in probably midsummer where I was talking to one of the pastors that I work with, and he made the statement that he said, listen, Caleb, we just have to learn to work with this long term. And certainly when quarantine started, it was something that I thought, okay, this is going to be a month or even 2 weeks. I think he even said 2 weeks in some places. So let's just get over it, you know. But now we see that this is a long term, and I think that's a significant thing to think about too. That some of these barriers that we see are kind of quick, like what happened in our kitchen. I mean, that's very temporary. Although we still haven't taken care of it, we still haven't like done the remodel to fix it and stuff. But we're able to continue on, right? But with quarantine, it's something that we have to have long term think about how do we function long term. But the common thing in both of those is learning to be flexible.
Yes.
And know that there is no barrier that is really a true barrier to the gospel. And so God has some plan, some ability to use those one way or another.
I think when you talk about flexibility, I think flexibility marks the life of a missionary.
Right.
because there's constantly something that you need to adjust to, either political situation or closed borders due to quarantine or whatever else. You don't have a building to meet in or something of that sort. And so flexibility, I think even of any Christian.
Right, and I think the verse that comes to my mind is in Proverbs where it says that man plans his path, but God guides his steps. That's a paraphrase. But the idea is that we do need to plan and all, but in the end we know that it is God guiding us in these things. He's sovereign over these things. And one of the scriptures, there's a couple of scriptures that I think that have bearing on this, and really a lot of it is just our outlook. And one is in Philippians where Paul talks to the Philippians and he writes to them and he talks about being in prison because they saw prison as being this barrier for him, barrier to the gospel, barrier to what
hindrance
his plans were for ministry, for what God had planned for him, what he wanted to do in ministry. And Paul says something very interesting. He did not see it as a barrier at all. Philippians chapter 1, verse 12, he says, I want you to know, brothers, that what has happened to me has really served to advance the gospel so that it has become known through the whole imperial guard and to all the rest of that my imprisonment is for Christ. And most of the brothers, having become confident in the Lord by my imprisonment, are much more bold to speak the word without fear. And so Paul saw his imprisonment not as a barrier, but actually as something that really pushed the gospel further. And I think that that's a perspective that we also need as we think about these unexpected, whether it's a tragedy or a flood in the kitchen or coronavirus, that somehow God can use that in our lives for the furtherment of the gospel.
Yeah.
So how can you use the flood in our kitchen?
Reach out to our neighbor, I suppose.
Yeah,
That's a good.
We haven't had a whole lot of contact with that neighbor. A little bit here and there, but now we're gonna have. Well, but we need to go pretty soon and say, hey, are you ready to pay for? But and I think that's a point too, where as we think about, soon we need to hopefully take care of some of these remodels that need to be done because of that we can show her some grace and not just demand, okay, pay for this and pay for that, but show her some grace in that too.
Yes. Yeah, I was just thinking that the life of Paul is actually a life of flexibility. He was shipwrecked. He was a tent maker. He just adjusted to whatever circumstances he was in. He was preaching in the prison. He was preaching on the ship. He was
right. And that was the other scripture that I was thinking of in terms of this too, is from 2 Corinthians chapter 11, where when Paul is trying to prove his apostleship, and he proves it in a very interesting way. He proves it through the hardships that he has gone through. And so he says in 2 Corinthians 11:23, are they servants of Christ? I'm a better one. I'm talking like a madman, with far greater labors, far more imprisonments, with countless beatings, and often near death. And then he just lists all of these things that we would see as, wow, this is a real big problem. This is a barrier to you doing the ministry God has called you to do. 5 times I received at the hands of the Jews the 40 lashes less one. 3 times I was beaten with rods. Once I was stoned. 3 times I was shipwrecked. A night and a day I was adrift at sea, on frequent journeys, in danger from rivers, in danger from robbers, danger from my own people, danger from Gentiles, danger in the city, danger in the wilderness, danger at sea, danger from false brethren, in toil and hardship, through many a sleepless night, in hunger and thirst, often without food, in cold and exposure. And apart from all other things, there's the daily pressure on me, anxiety of all the churches.
Wow.
And so we can't get too...
Can't be too jealous of Paul and his burdens.
Self-pity when we think, we had a flood in the kitchen or something like that. But we do have, in addition to those concerns, we have our ministry, we have the life of the church, we have outreach, we have all these other things. And so my encouragement or my advice in these things is have that prepared perspective that these things, they will happen, and when they do happen, God can and will use them in some way to further the gospel. And don't view them as things that just simply take you away from gospel ministry, but things that actually could, if you have the right approach to them, improve your gospel ministry.
True.
And then as we react to those things, think about, like we're thinking about our neighbor. How can we show God's grace as our neighbor causes damage, so we could demand this. And, most likely she will help pay for some of it. But we also know that might be a big hardship for her, so we want to show her grace as much as possible in that. And that's the way that we can reach out to her.
But what do you do in, say, the ministry that you have right now with Odessa International Fellowship? What are some of the things that you do to continue? Because we actually are planning to open officially our ministry on the 18th of October, and it's coming up very soon here.
So, we can talk about some of the ministry things that are happening, our care for all the churches, right?
Yeah.
So as far as Odessa International Fellowship, you may or may not be aware, but one of the things we had to be flexible in is we didn't go to the States this last summer. Instead, God had us stay here, focus on planting an international church here in Odessa. And so we've been working on that over the last 6 months or more, and we have planned a grand opening service on October 18th. And it's just the kind of thing too where, like you said, record day for coronavirus. We understand that, and we know that the coronavirus is here. I personally think that most likely sooner or later I'll get coronavirus if I haven't already had it, because I was also sick for a little bit in September, wasn't I?
A day and a half.
Well, I mean, who knows what it was, but by faith we just see God moving this direction, and so we just didn't want to just sit back and wait for everything to have the perfect conditions. So even though the conditions are not very perfect, we just felt God leading us in that direction after we prayed and talked with some other believers about it. So October 18th is the official start date for our church. We're going to have a service. We're having guests come. Really, really appreciate your prayers for that. I was just talking with some of our teammates today who are helping us with this church plant and trying to plan that. But pray for our health. Pray for outreach to more foreigners here in Odessa, to more students here in Odessa, and just pray for God's blessing in this new endeavor. It's a new thing for us, but we see that there are a lot of internationals here. There's a lot of opportunity to serve them and to share the gospel with them as well.
And we do see quite a bit of interest just from other English speakers to come and help, which is actually very encouraging to us because we alone would not be able to do it.
Absolutely.
And so we're encouraged to see other people joining in with our team, and Saj.
Well, yeah, and Saj and Natasha, one couple that's helping us. Saj is Indian, Natasha's Ukrainian. So I have two international couples there.
Yeah.
And so we really appreciate their help. We saw that as a sign that God was leading us in that direction too.
One of the things that we did in order to sort of comply with the quarantine limitations was we actually went from Caleb's office that is downtown. We went and we rented a larger hall to be able to kind of spread out more and as much as we can comply to that so that the government would not be able to come in and just say no, too many people in too small of a facility. So hopefully we can continue meeting if that is Lord's will. If not,
right, and we haven't seen
Zoom
problems with that yet. But another thing that you can be praying about is we have elections coming up in Ukraine. I know you might be thinking about elections in the U.S. right now, but we have elections coming up in Ukraine October 27th, I believe, and we're expecting that after elections, it's possible that they will clamp down on quarantine and make it more strict after that. So again, we're just trying to prepare ourselves and be ready for that.
Yes.
And that was one of the reasons why we wanted to plan our grand opening service before the elections, because we saw those elections coming. That we might not be able to do that after the elections.
Yeah.
So who knows? We might have this grand opening and the next Sunday no service. It could be, but we're just putting that all in God's hands and moving forward in those areas that we can move forward, trusting God to do the rest. So, Christina, let me ask you a couple of questions about your ministry as well.
Sure.
So you are working with several women. How many women are you counseling right now at the Women's Center?
I have 3 women that I work with right now, and 2 of them I counsel by phone, or we have Viber messaging system, and I call them. One actually lives in our city, but on the other end, and the other one lives the same distance, but in a neighboring city. So those 2 that I counsel by phone, and then one more we meet with her face to face at the center.
What is your biggest challenge when you are counseling them?
I think it's fairly difficult not being there with the woman when you talk to her. You do feel that like you can't hold her hand if she's struggling with something. You can't kind of give her a hug or a pat in the back or something like that. But another thing is I just feel like it's a lot more personal, I guess, when you're face to face.
Sure.
Yeah. I would ask you to pray for one of my clients. She says that she's a Christian, but some of the things that she believes are really far from Christianity, and she really questions things of God, things that we study in the Bible. We'll go through the story of hope with them. It's ABWE material that they made for evangelism, and so those are just 40 stories from the Bible, and they're very basic, but they're already trouble. There's already trouble. They're brewing in the first lessons of that.
You mean
book.
because they don't understand things, or they disagree with things, or
mainly because they disagree. They just can't. They can't seem to accept, even though they're saying they're Christians and they observe all the religious holidays. They're very religious. There's still just some disconnect. So I know that God is sovereign, and I know that He can work in their hearts, and my job is to make it as clear as possible to them so that they could accept Christ, accept God's word.
Okay. And beyond working with these women, what other kind of ministry are you involved in?
Let's see. I do little things here and there.
Well, I was thinking more of the accounting.
Yeah.
It's not a little thing.
I do accounting for our team finances. It does involve some time spent in front of the computer and crunching a few numbers, but it's fine. I like math.
Yeah, and that's honestly, it's a very vital thing for our team and for the ministry here, because we do help some churches, some local churches, and have some sister church relationships that have to be make sure that everything is accounted for. So that's a big help, because it's kind of a behind the scenes thing, but something that definitely needs to be done.
Yeah, I just wanted to mention that an anonymous donor gave a pretty large sum of money to be distributed to the pastors in not in our area, but to the pastors that we know that could have a need at this moment. And actually, from that fund, we were able to help some pastors who were concerned with the heating situation for their churches, and or for instance, fixing up their church buildings. So we're very thankful for all of your donations that help to continue ministry here in Ukraine despite of the coronavirus.
Right, yeah, definitely. That's what keeps us here.
Yes.
All right. Anything else you want to fill them in on?
Continue to pray for our children who are far away from home, that they would stay close to the Lord, that they would, that their faith would be strengthened, and that they would be able to make wise decisions. We try to put into them as much wisdom as we could, but when they're on their own, they have to eventually start making those decisions. So we're praying for them, and you please pray for us, because we still have 3 more kids at home, and boy, do they need good input before they leave the house.
I also want to mention that we are continuing our evangelism discipleship seminars. In fact, today, one of our teachers is going to be presenting to the all Ukraine Council for the Union of Baptist Churches here in Kiev. Tomorrow they're going to be doing a training session. So I'm not always physically present in all of those, but this past week, and I forgot to mention that, this past month in September, I actually did a seminar on my own, because the pastor that I was supposed to teach with got sick. And again, that's one of those things where you have to be flexible. He got sick, and I said, you know what, Roma, just stay home, because we're trying to be careful during this coronavirus. So I ended up doing that seminar on my own on a Saturday, teaching all day. But what a good group we had. This church called Crossroads here in Odessa. So we're planning to do a second part of that seminar, maybe coming up this month. And so appreciate, as we continue to do these seminars here in Odessa, in Kiev, and in other parts of Ukraine, we're moving forward with those seminars and training believers to effectively share the gospel and raise up new disciples for Christ. All right, is that it?
Yes, that sounds like it.
Thank you so much for your prayers, for your support. If you are not on our email list, you can go to superfamily.org/pray. Also would suggest that you subscribe to our YouTube channel if you haven't done that already. I'm trying to put these types of little videos out once a month. So if you have any suggestions for what you might like us to talk about, write it in the comments or send me a note, and we'll try and take on some of those questions and some of those comments. But as always, we just appreciate your prayers and your supports.
Thanks for being with us.
Blessings.